There is a tree growing across 40 states that produces a seed fat nearly identical to cocoa butter. Same fatty acids, same melting point, same behavior on the tongue. The chocolate industry spends $130 billion a year pretending this tree does not matter. Cities call it a weed. Homeowners pay to cut it down. And every autumn, its seeds fall by the millions and rot on the ground. And by the end of this video, you will know exactly which tree it is, how to process its seeds yourself, and why a $130 billion industry prayed you would never find out. Hi, I am Harry, and this is Garden Explained with Harry. Everyone loves chocolate, but almost nobody understands what actually makes it work. It is not the cocoa powder, it is not the sugar, it is the fat, cocoa butter. That pale yellow fat extracted from cacao beans is the reason chocolate snaps when you break it. It is the reason chocolate melts the moment it touches your tongue and not a second before. Without cocoa butter, chocolate is just brown powder. Dry, chalky, worthless. The entire global chocolate supply chain, every factory, every wrapper, every truffle and every shop window depends on a steady supply of that one specific fat. And that supply chain is falling apart. 70% of the world's cacao grows in two countries, Côte d'Ivoire and Ghana, West Africa. A narrow belt of tropical forest that is shrinking every year. Climate models show the cocoa belt losing up to 40% of suitable growing land by 2050. Cacao trees need very specific conditions: consistent humidity, stable temperatures between 20 and 30 degrees. Deep tropical shade. They cannot tolerate drought. They cannot tolerate frost. They cannot grow outside a thin band near the equator. And within that band, disease is spreading. Swollen shoot virus has destroyed hundreds of thousands of hectares in Ghana alone. Farmers are aging out. Young people are leaving for cities. The trees take 5 years to produce their first harvest. The economics make no sense for the next generation. Cocoa butter prices have doubled since 2020. Futures markets are swinging wildly. Chocolate companies are reformulating products with cheaper fats to protect margins. The industry is not just expensive, it is fragile. One bad season in West Africa and the global chocolate supply contracts overnight. Everyone in the industry knows this. Everyone is quietly searching for alternatives, but not the alternative that has been growing in plain sight for 9,000 years. Now consider a different kind of seed. A wild seed growing across most of the northern hemisphere. Small, hard-shelled, unremarkable to look at. But inside that shell sits a kernel containing a fat with the same 3 dominant fatty acids as cocoa butter: palmitic acid, stearic acid, oleic acid. These are the building blocks that give cocoa butter its crystalline structure. The specific way these fatty acids attach to the glycerol backbone determines how the fat behaves. When it melts, how it solidifies, whether it snaps or bends. The fat inside this wild seed arranges these acids in patterns that overlap with cocoa butter so closely that food scientists have flagged it as a functional cocoa butter equivalent, not a cheap imitation, a structural match. The melting point sits within 2 degrees Celsius or 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit of cocoa butter, around 34 to 38 degrees Celsius or 93 to 100 degrees Fahrenheit. The solid fat content at room temperature follows a similar curve. While hackberry seed fat possesses an intriguing fatty acid profile, never attempt to make homemade chocolate or food items using raw or unrefined home-pressed hackberry oil. Wild Celtis seeds often harbor environmental mold toxins, and raw kernels contain naturally occurring anti-nutrients, such as phytic acid and tannins, and trace cyanogenic glycosides that require precise, industrial-grade refining and thermal inactivation before they are safe for human consumption. The research confirming this exists, published, peer-reviewed, and almost entirely ignored by the companies that could use it tomorrow. Now go deeper, 9,000 years deeper. Archaeologists working the Koster site in the Illinois River Valley uncovered something remarkable in the lowest excavation layers. Seed pits, thousands of them, crushed, processed, mixed with animal fat and dried grain into dense calorie cakes. Radiocarbon dating placed these layers at 7,000 BC. The people living along that river had developed a systematic food processing technology around this specific seed nearly 5,000 years before the Egyptian pyramids were built. This was not casual snacking. This was infrastructure, organized, repeated across centuries, designed to survive winters that killed everything else. The same processed seed appeared at dozens of archaeological sites across the central and eastern woodlands. The Pawnee used it. The Dakota used it. The Comanche carried it as trail food across the southern plains. The Omaha mixed it into pemmican. They did not just eat the thin, sweet flesh around the outside. They crushed the entire fruit, shell and all, into a paste. They pounded it with stone tools until the hard seed cracked and released its fat. Some nations fermented the crushed fruits before pressing them, letting the flesh break down around the seed for several days. A process that would have modified the fat structure in exactly the way modern food chemistry now describes. 9,000 years of food technology, exposed, documented in the dirt, and dismissed by every institution that followed. You have seen this tree. You have walked past it 1,000 times. It grows in sidewalk cracks. It grows in abandoned parking lots. It pushes through chain-link fences and crumbling foundations. It tolerates drought. It tolerates flooding. It tolerates pollution, compacted soil, brutal cold, and complete neglect. Arborists call it a trash tree. Landscapers refuse to plant it. Homeowners curse it because its roots crack driveways and its berries stain concrete. Cities across the Midwest and South list it as a nuisance species. It is the most disrespected tree on the continent. It is the hackberry, Celtis occidentalis, and there is a very good chance you have one growing within 200 feet of where you are sitting right now. The hackberry is not just an American tree. The genus Celtis grows on every continent except Antarctica. Celtis australis across the Mediterranean and the Middle East, from Portugal to Iran. Celtis sinensis across China, Japan, and Korea. Celtis africana across sub-Saharan Africa from Ethiopia to South Africa. Aboriginal communities in Australia used native Celtis species as food for thousands of years. In the Mediterranean, Celtis australis was so important to ancient cultures that many scholars believe it is the lotus tree described in Homer's Odyssey. The tree whose fruit was so satisfying that sailors forgot their desire to go home. A tree woven into the oldest literature of Western civilization, and modern Westerners treat it as garbage. Now put the two pieces together. The chocolate industry needs cocoa butter. Cocoa butter comes from a fragile tropical monoculture controlled by 2 countries and threatened by climate change. Cocoa butter trades at $8 to $12 per kilogram at wholesale and rising fast. The industry searches constantly for cocoa butter equivalents. They approve shea butter from West Africa, Ilipe from Southeast Asia, sal fat from India, kokum from the Western Ghats, mango kernel fat from tropical orchards. Every approved alternative comes from a tropical tree embedded in the same kind of supply chain. Controlled, centralized. expensive to process. Now consider hackberry. It grows wild in temperate climates. Across 40 American states and equivalent zones in Europe and Asia. Nobody plants it, nobody waters it, nobody sprays it, nobody fertilizes it. The seeds fall by the tens of thousands from a single mature tree every autumn. They fall on sidewalks and driveways and gutters, and nobody picks them up. A fat source that costs nothing. That regenerates every year without human input. That thrives in climates where cacao would die in a week. The industry does not want this alternative. The industry cannot afford this alternative because it cannot be controlled. Cocoa butter equivalents are a regulated market. The European Union permits up to 5% non-cocoa fat in products labeled as chocolate. That 5% represents billions in annual trade. The companies supplying those fats operate through the same centralized channels as the cocoa industry itself. Controlled origins, licensed processing, proprietary blending formulas. The margins depend on complexity. The more steps between the raw seed and the finished fat, the more money changes hands. Hackberry threatens every single step. You cannot patent a wild tree. You cannot create a seed monopoly on a species that grows in every highway median from Virginia to Nebraska. You cannot sell annual seed stock for a tree that lives 200 years and drops its own seed every fall. You cannot build a processing empire around a fat that can be extracted with a hand press in a garden shed. Every layer of the industrial food supply chain requires scarcity, repeat purchases, and controlled access. Hackberry offers abundance, permanence, and zero barriers to entry. Search any academic database for cocoa butter alternatives. You will find thousands of studies on the approved tropical sources: shea, ilipe, sal, kokum. Now search for Celtis seed oil or hackberry seed fat composition. The studies exist. The fatty acid profiles have been documented. The melting behavior has been tested. The results confirm what indigenous people on this continent knew 9,000 years ago. But no major food company has funded a scale trial. No industry consortium has invested in hackberry oil processing infrastructure. The studies sit in journals that nobody in the chocolate industry cites. A tree that grows for free in 40 states, producing a fat that matches their most critical ingredient, and the only people who ever processed it systematically were the people whose food traditions Western agriculture spent 3 centuries erasing. This is not conspiracy. This is economics. Companies fund research that supports their existing products and supply chains. They do not fund research that makes those products unnecessary. Universities pursue grants from available sources. The sources favor patentable interventions and controlled supply chains. A wild tree cannot be patented. A hand-pressed oil cannot be licensed. The funding flows toward tropical alternatives that fit existing business models. The research follows the funding. The knowledge gap persists. And every autumn, another 100 million hackberry seeds rot on American sidewalks, while the chocolate industry pays $12 per kilogram for fat shipped from the other side of the planet. Here is what you can do about it. Hackberry fruits ripen in September and October across most of their range. They are small, round, about the size of a pea. They start green and ripen to dark purple or reddish brown. The thin outer flesh is sweet and edible straight off the tree. Birds love them. So did every indigenous nation that lived within the tree's range. But the flesh is not the prize. The prize is inside. Crack the hard outer shell of the seed. Inside, you will find a small pale kernel. This is where the fat lives. Collect the fruits in bulk. This is easy because a single mature tree drops more fruit than you could gather in a day. Spread them on screens or trays and let them dry in a warm space for a week. Once dry, the shells crack more easily. Use a grain mill, a heavy mortar, or even a rolling pin on a hard surface. Separate the shell fragments from the kernels. Grind the kernels into a paste. From here, you have two paths. The first is simple cold pressing. Pack the ground kernels into a cloth or mesh bag and press. A small hand press, the same kind used for olive oil or nut oils, works fine. The oil that comes out is pale, mild, and solidifies at cool room temperature. This is your raw hackberry fat. The melting profile is close to cocoa butter straight out of the press. The second path is fermentation. This is the method that moves the fat profile even closer to cocoa butter and develops flavor compounds. Take the whole fresh fruits before drying, crush them lightly, and let the fruit pulp ferment in a controlled container. The microbial activity breaks down sugars in the flesh and begins modifying the fat chemistry inside the seed. This is the same basic principle behind cacao fermentation, where raw cacao beans are piled in banana leaves and left for days, while microbes transform the flavor and fat structure. Spontaneous home fermentation of wild fruits carries a high risk of growth by pathogenic wild yeasts, molds producing carcinogenic aflatoxins, and harmful bacteria, including Clostridium and Salmonella. Unlike cacao beans, which undergo high-temperature industrial roasting, often at temperatures greater than 120 degrees Celsius or 250 degrees Fahrenheit, to kill pathogens and neutralize toxins after fermentation. Uncontrolled home fermentation of hackberry seeds, followed by simple cold pressing, can concentrate toxic microbial metabolites into the final oil. The resulting fat will have a more complex flavor profile and a triglyceride structure that sits closer to cocoa butter than the cold-pressed version. A single mature hackberry tree produces fruit every year for decades. Some specimens have been documented fruiting reliably for over 150 years. You do not replant, you do not fertilize, you do not irrigate. The tree handles everything. One tree in your yard or on your street provides an annual supply of a fat that the chocolate industry pays premium prices to source from plantations across the equator. The hackberry does not care about futures markets. It does not care about supply chain logistics or trade agreements or quarterly earnings reports. It has been producing this fat since before agriculture existed on this continent. It was here when the first people crossed into the Americas. It was here when those people built the first processing technology around its seeds. It was here when European settlers arrived and ignored it. It was here when arborists labeled it a trash tree. It was here when homeowners paid money to cut it down and plant ornamental maples in its place. The seeds are falling right now on sidewalks, in parking lots, in your yard. They have always been falling. The only thing that changed is that someone finally told you what they contain.